Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and before we get rolling today, I wanted to invite you to ask me anything. I would love to know how this show could be super helpful to you, and I figure one of the ways to do that is to have you actually record messages and send them to me that I could play on the show, or write to me at hello@brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. And let me know what your questions are about a particular condition and how Chinese medicine might see that condition, about health and healing, about mindfulness, about Qigong, about anything that you are curious about, maybe that you've heard on the show, or maybe that you wish you had heard on the show, or anything going on in your own life. And I would love to fill an entire episode with answering your questions, or perhaps sprinkle them into episodes relating to the topic that you're asking about. So get out your phone, record a voice memo, and email it to hello@brodywelch.com. I'm super curious about what you are curious about, and I'm excited to answer your questions. Of course, I can't diagnose or treat via an email or a voice memo, but we can certainly talk about whatever it is you are curious about. To pick my brain in further detail about your personal circumstances, you can go to brodywelch.com and learn how to work with me one-on-one as a coach or health consultant, or as an acupuncture and herbs patient. And now on to today's conversation. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist, and today we're going to be talking about chronic pain and what we can do about it. As an acupuncturist, this is something that I see all the time and treat multiple times a day. People with chronic migraines, chronic back pain, chronic neck pain, chronic fibromyalgia pain, pain of all sorts that tends to respond really, really well to acupuncture. But acupuncture is not the only way in. Certainly, Chinese herbal medicine, Qigong, lifestyle and diet all play a role, as can mindfulness. We're going to be delving into this a lot today with Dr. Joe Tatta, who is a global leader in integrative pain care and an advocate for the safe and effective treatment of chronic pain. I've had him on the show once before and really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm really excited to have him back to talk about partly his new book that he has coming out, or that I guess is out at this point. And we'll be talking into what's changed since last we talked. He's the founder of the Integrative Pain Science Institute, which is a cutting-edge health company reinventing pain care through evidence-based treatment, research, and professional development. And for 25 years, he has supported people living with pain and helped practitioners deliver more effective pain management. Dr. Joe Tatta, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity.
Hi, Brody. It's great to be back here with you. Looking forward to chatting today.
Me too. First off, let's bring people up to speed and talk about why chronic pain is even a thing. Like, why doesn't the body just fix itself following an injury and then have pain go away?
Yeah, it's a great place to start when we're talking about pain, to try to give people some context, the difference between what we know as acute or short-term pain compared to what is long-term or chronic pain. Let's start with the acute first. So the acute or short-term pain is pain that lasts less than 3 months. And this is typically pain that develops from an injury where there's damage to tissue. So let's say you sprain your ankle and there's damage to some tissue there. As you mentioned, your body has a wonderful way to heal itself. And your immune system is the part of your body that does that. So if you, let's say, damage some tissue in your ankle or in any other part of your body, your immune system kind of launches this rapid healing response where it heals the tissue, a little bit of inflammation first. You get a little swelling and inflammation first. And over time, it'll lay down new tissue and that area heals. And in the ideal world, as the tissue heals, the pain goes away. And for the most part, that is the experience that many people have when they have an injury. However, there's a whole nother group of people who go on to experience chronic pain. And as I mentioned before, chronic pain is long-term pain that goes on past that 3-month period. Now, you might be asking yourself at this point, if the body has an immune system and it healed the tissue, how come some people no longer have pain and other people go on to develop chronic pain? And the answer to that lies really within the brain or lies within the mind. With chronic pain, there are psychological variables that come into play. So things like fear of pain, anxiety or pain-related anxiety, depression, psychological variables associated with trauma, previous variables that come from early life experiences, all that contributes to this experience of pain. Now, in a brain that's sensitized, if you will, in a brain that pays a lot of attention to fear, pays a lot of attention to anxiety, your brain actually generates pain. It's not the tissues in your body. And that right there can kind of be a big eye opener for people, that the brain generates pain and not the tissues in your body. So if the brain generates pain, you can have tissues that have healed 100%, but the brain is still continuing to generate that pain, even though the injury is well healed. So that's why chronic pain develops or persists past that 3-month period of acute pain or short-term pain.
So there may not be actually anything wrong with the area of the body that hurts, but the brain is still perceiving that there is something wrong.
That's right.
The brain is
That's
creating the pain.
That's right. The brain, in essence, is creating the pain. That can be confusing right there to people. And we can spend a couple of moments and just clarify that for people and talk about that. So I guess the first kind of bullet point we want to address is when we're talking about pain and the brain or pain in the mind, the first really important message that we want to deliver to people is we're not saying that they're making it up. We're not saying that they're crazy. We're not saying that pain is a mental health condition, because it's not. But ultimately, your brain is in control in some way or has an influence in some way over every function of your body. So just like information comes into your nervous system with regard to taste and sight and smell, information also comes into your nervous system about things like fear and pain. And if your brain perceives that you're in danger, if your brain perceives that there's something to be concerned about or worry about here, then it can generate pain as a way to kind of, in essence, like set the red light off, kind of like the harm alarm, so to speak. So you can be in a similar context. Let's say, for example, you hurt your back bending over and picking up a heavy box. And let's say that happened on June 1st. 3 months passes, the tissue in your back heals, whether that's muscle or a ligament or a disc, all that heals after 3 months. But let's say the pain continues. You may notice that you feel back pain when you bend over, or when you're near a box, or when you're lifting up packages. Really, what's happening is your brain is recognizing, hey, this is a very similar situation that I was in when I hurt myself.
Right. Danger might be
Right.
present. We need to be alert here.
That's right. Your brain stores danger. Your brain remembers what the dangerous circumstances were. Just like it, so I have a kind of a small bedroom at home, and oftentimes I stub my toe on the bed as I kind of go around it. Now, it's taken me a couple of times to remember, but my brain is now trained to know that, okay, the area between the bed and the corner there is tight, so I need to kind of swing around a little wider to avoid that pain. The same thing happens. Your brain stores memories and it remembers those memories. And if you're in a similar environment or a similar context to that memory, your brain can create pain as a warning sign.
That makes a lot of sense, as really like we're well adapted to survive things that are dangerous. And so it's great that the brain has this capability of like, hey, remember when we were here before, this wasn't so good. And we don't want to put ourselves at risk here. And yet, just because, well, the past does not predict the future, things can look like the same situation, but not every time we go to lift something up is it necessarily going to result in an injury or in a painful circumstances. So, how do we train our brains to forget the pain?
That's the $1 million question. And those are the things I love to talk about. So the first actually is what's called pain education. And that's really what we're talking about right here. When you help people clarify the difference between acute pain and chronic pain, and they start to kind of come around to the realization that, okay, I have pain in my knee or I have pain in my back, but there's something else going on here that no one has told me about. Typically, physicians aren't really up to date on the latest pain science. So they're not really talking to their patients about this. Usually they're looking at an x ray or an MRI and they're using just the structure of the body to explain pain. That is very old and very outdated. And we actually know that in many ways it can cause harm because people believe that the problem is 100% in their tissues, which you and I now and everyone listening to this knows that's not the case based on our conversation here.
Right. And it's reinforced like with every time people get imagery and they're like, oh, well, it's bone on bone, or like, yeah, I slipped a disc, or like I've seen it. I have proof that I need to be in pain all the time.
That's
When
right.
actually we know that there's actually very little correlation between what we're seeing, that someone can have a massive disc issue and not have any back pain, and someone else might have major back pain, but their x-ray might look fine.
That's right. And that's why when we talk about some of the new modern pain science like we're talking about today, people have these kind of aha moments. They're like, oh, okay, that might make sense that there's something else happening besides the tissues because I've gone to physical therapy. I've tried everything tissue based. What else is there that can help me overcome this, so to speak? So, essential pain education really is the first step. And that's not necessarily going to change someone's pain, but it does start to decrease their fear a substantial amount. Because if they don't feel like they're injuring themselves when they move, if they're less scared of injuring themselves as they move to their daily activities, re engage with physical activity and exercise, then it tells them, okay, this is kind of safe. Let me start to explore this and let me see what this is like. So it helps people with re engaging with their daily activities. So fear and education, big part of it. The second part is teaching some essential mindfulness and cognitive skills about how the brain works or how the mind works and how that relates to pain. There are many, many, many studies now on mindfulness and another form of cognitive behavioral therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is deeply rooted in mindfulness that help people become aware of the thoughts that they're having about their pain, aware of the beliefs that they're having about their pain, and realize that our mind generates thoughts like this, and our thoughts have an influence on how we feel. Not only does our mind and our thoughts have an influence on how we feel, but if we allow it, if we don't have these essential skills, then in essence, our thoughts can dictate our behavior. So, for example, if you're scared of pain, if you're scared of, let's say, low back pain coming back on, and your thoughts are, I shouldn't bend over, I shouldn't exercise, I shouldn't sit for too long, this pain's never going to go away, I have a huge herniated disc in my back. Those are what they call negative thoughts or catastrophizing thoughts about pain. The more that builds, kind of in many ways, the more anxious people become. And we start to allow our thoughts to dictate our behavior or dictate our actions. And that's where people, in essence, become stuck. Because if I allowed every thought that I had, or if we allowed every thought that we had, and this is even for people without pain, to dictate our every behavior, there's a pretty good chance most of us wouldn't leave the house each day. We wouldn't get off the couch. We, would do all sorts of things to avoid uncomfortable or unpleasant experiences in our life. So turning people on to the idea that the brain creates thoughts, we have thoughts, and we can learn to cope with these thoughts in ways that are useful and beneficial with regard to overcoming pain.
I'd like to hear more about acceptance and commitment therapy and what that's like, because clearly we do need to be able to leave the house, and clearly we can't carry out. That it makes a lot of sense to get ourselves to not be catastrophizing, to be able to identify the thoughts that are contributing to keeping us stuck. Is there what should we be doing instead if we catch ourselves in that kind of mental loop?
Yeah, so acceptance and commitment therapy is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. It was started back in the 80s and it's been widely researched, and it has level 1A evidence for chronic pain, which basically means it has the highest level evidence out there for a psychological intervention for pain. Again, we're not diagnosing psychopathology here. We're basically just using different techniques to optimize the mind and to help people with their thoughts and how their thoughts have an impact on behavior. Traditional cognitive behavioral therapy has a focus on changing thoughts. So, for example, if you go to a traditional psychologist or a traditional cognitive behavioral therapist, they may work on reframing thoughts or the reappraisal of thoughts. These more advanced forms of cognitive behavioral therapy, things like acceptance and commitment therapy, or what's called ACT, it's called ACT for short, is part of a third wave group of therapies that implements a lot of mindfulness. And the mindfulness traditions really tell us that we have thoughts. Your brain generates anywhere from 8,000 to 15,000 thoughts a day. And just like your heart goes thump, thump, thump all day long, your brain thinks, thinks, and thinks. And we probably, for the most part, have little control over not only the flow of our thoughts, but also the content of our thoughts. So, if, for example, we can kind of do this, do we have time for a little experiential exercise, Birdie?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do it.
So there's an exercise in my newest book called Radical Relief. It's a metaphor, and I ask people to imagine that you're placing a special pair of hearing aids over the outside of your ear. And unlike most hearing aids that allow you to listen to the outside world, this pair of hearing aids allows you to listen to your inside world. So for the next 30 seconds, we're just going to have a little bit of silence here. Everyone at home can do this with us. And all I want you to do, Brody, is listen to the flow of your thoughts. And as you're observing the flow of your thoughts, just note to yourself if these thoughts are positive, if they're negative, or maybe they're in the middle somewhere neutral. So let's do that maybe for about the next 20 seconds. And as you're listening into your own thoughts, you may notice that they slow down. You may notice that they speed up. You may notice that sometimes they even stop completely. But if you give it enough time, probably a couple seconds, it starts right back up again. So it's just a simple exercise that demonstrates that one, we have thoughts, and two, there's a whole lot going on there that we don't necessarily have a whole lot of control over. So the best evidence behind these acceptance and mindfulness based approaches to chronic pain is looking to instead change our thoughts and changing our beliefs. We instead just learn to relate to them differently. I can give you another example. So a lot of what ACT is based on is a fancy term which is called relational frame theory. And relational frame theory is kind of the theory that underlies ACT. And it basically says that your thoughts, as well as the language that you use, has an impact on the way you live or the way you behave.
That makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, with that, teaching people how their mind works, for example, is a nice way to help people relate differently to their thoughts. So, for example, with regard to changing negative thoughts. So a lot of times people use like positive coping statements like I'm strong or I'm happy or I'm smart. And they last for a little while, but most people probably will notice that they have kind of like a weaning quality to them. Like after a while, they go away. And that's true because your brain is constantly making these new thoughts and constantly, in essence, changing your mind about different things. So we don't have a very good way to change thoughts. So here, let's do another little exercise. I'd like you to think about the happiest time in your life, Birdie. And when you have that memory present, just let me know that it's there.
Okay.
Good. Pretty easy to contact a really happy memory, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. And now, what I'd like you to do with all your might, see if you can delete that memory. So, as much as you can, put all your force and effort to it behind it and see if that memory can just be deleted from your memory bank. How are you doing?
It seems like focusing on something else erases it, but I think it's probably still there if I were to
Yeah.
look.
So, sometimes a little bit of distraction may take it away for a couple seconds and then
Hmm.
boom, it comes right back, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Now, with regard to pain, we have negative thoughts about pain or thoughts that aren't as useful or help us cope, right? So I'd like you to think about a time in your life that was unhappy or unpleasant. Doesn't have to be the worst moment. Just think about something that was not very enjoyable for you.
That's way too easy.
Yeah, right. especially nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And now with all your might, using all the tools that you have in life so far, Brody, see if you can delete that memory from your memory bank.
Yeah, that's not happening.
Right. That's not happening. And then we thought about distraction too, right? You brought distraction up, right?
Hmm.
So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to think about a pink butterfly.
Got it.
Now that you have that idea of a butterfly in mind, over the next 10 seconds, I want you to try not to think about a pink butterfly. But if you do think about a pink butterfly, just note how many times you think about a pink butterfly. You can sing a song, you can do a dance.
That's pretty persistent.
Yeah. So it shows you that distraction doesn't work very well. And in some ways, distraction can actually have a paradoxical effect, where if you try to distract from things that are unpleasant or painful in our life, it actually makes you think about them even more. So, in essence, what we're really turning to is kind of this willingness approach that if these
Yeah.
painful thoughts don't go away, if these painful memories and emotions don't go away, if the physical pain in my body doesn't go away either, then how can I start to relate to this in a way that's actually healthy? And what we actually find is when we teach people these healthy ways of relating to pain differently, that it actually takes the pain away.
So, ways of taking the pain away. It sounds like you're saying that distraction can actually have a paradoxical effect, which is seemingly it fits right in with Chinese medical theory in terms of that we actually have to experience everything that we're going through in order to be kind of in the present moment. And that if we aren't processing things, if we're kind of shoving things into closets to deal with later, eventually all the closets are full and it's just hard to move around. And it's like we don't really have a choice. And the fact that if if something is unpleasant or uncomfortable, the energy that it takes to not go there, it might actually it is like, first of all, not only exhausting, but might be actually setting down roots for hanging out with that and reinforcing that experience. So it sounds like being willing to just go to the territory of experiencing what we're experiencing is a key ingredient here.
That's right. Willingness is a big part of the ACT model. So the ACT model has these 6 core psychological processes. Willingness is one of those processes. The other one is values, present moment awareness, committed action, self as context, and then cognitive diffusion or diffusion. Those 6 processes all fold into this ACT model, and they all contribute to a core process called psychological flexibility. Now, we probably don't have time to go into all those processes because it's kind of technical, but you brought up willingness. Brody, when I was a teenager, I used to be a lifeguard on a beach where I grew up on Long Island in New York. And the first thing they teach you as a lifeguard is how to deal with a rip current and how to help a swimmer who's stuck in a rip current. Because when a swimmer is stuck in a rip current, their first instinct is to swim against the tide. And as you swim against the tide, what happens is you become typically more and more tired and more exhausted, really to the point where you can't really swim anymore. You either have to be saved or other dreadful things happen. So, in essence, we actually don't save people who are caught in the rip current. What we do is we swim out to them, and we encourage them to swim with the current out into toward the ocean where it looks like it's deep and dangerous. But as you continue to swim with that current and willingly go with it, you wind up finally to a place where that current gently fades away, and then you can swim along the shore parallel to it, and then finally back to shore. So, in essence, what I just provided you with is a metaphor for pain. It can also be a metaphor for things like anxiety or depression. That oftentimes, if we fight the psychological content that is part of our experience, and really what I'm saying and what we're kind of talking about here is that pain, chronic pain, is both a physical experience as well as an emotional experience. Oftentimes, we don't have a lot of control over this physical experience, but we do have ways to work with the emotional or the psychological experience in ways that are helpful for us.
And that actually has a brain root as well, right? Like the difference between where chronic pain is actually takes up more real estate in the brain, and it goes to not only the prefrontal cortex but also into the limbic system. And so our perception of it is necessarily going to be kind of bigger and more emotional than in something more acute.
Yeah, and the more chronic pain continues, it actually has a tendency to grow. It's kind of like this little octopus that starts in your brain, and over time, those tentacles kind of stretch out and start to occupy really almost every single part of your brain. That's why people can identify pain with many, many different things. And it sounds kind of odd. It's like, wow, why do I have pain today? Well, there may be a smell that you came across that reminds you of something related to your pain. It may be a person, it may be something you see, something you feel, something you hear, a certain song, a certain time of the year. There are so many aspects related into this contextual approach to chronic pain, which is really what we're talking about. But all that can be reversed with the mind training techniques that we're talking about here. In essence, really what we're talking about is neuroplasticity. So it's just because there are changes that happened in the mind with chronic pain, we have ways to reverse that. Mindfulness and acceptance-based approaches are really good ways for that. In essence, they kind of take you out of that default mode of the mind, which is what many people wind up in when they don't have mindfulness skills, and instead start to train that salient part of the mind, which helps you with the techniques that we're talking about.
It makes a lot of sense thinking about pain and trauma as having so much in common, right? That we hang on to them so that we don't re-experience it. And memories are something that seems similar to experiencing the painful thing, whether that's a physical trauma or an emotional trauma of the past, that being able to steer our mind and be able to really develop new neural pathways that send us somewhere different other than just it kind of being right back in it again. That is something we certainly know is possible with repetition and intention over
That's right.
time.
Yeah. And what's interesting about your study, so definitely repetition and intention is a big part of it. So you can essentially, you're exercising your mind just like you'd exercise your body. And just like when you start an exercise program, you have to start out slow with just maybe a couple minutes a day and then build up over time. And it's very similar to many of these cognitive and mindfulness techniques that we're talking about here.
With the commitment aspect of acceptance and commitment therapy, what are people committing to?
As part of those 6 psychological processes that I mentioned before, one of them were values. What happens oftentimes with people with chronic pain is pain really strips life away from them. And it's something that you don't really notice it happens. So as pain develops and continues week by week and month by month and year by year, you slowly start to withdraw from all the things in your life that you loved, all the things that brought you joy and meaning, things like work, nurturing your health, spending time with family and friends, community activities, church. There's so many different aspects and what we call value domains in ACT that really people just stop engaging with. So one of the first parts of ACT, even before all this mindfulness stuff, is really just spending some time and talking to people about the life they want to recultivate, the life they want to rediscover, the life they want to re-explore or recreate, so to speak. Because right now, Brody, in our healthcare society, the golden rule is we have to alleviate pain first. And once the pain goes away, then you can get back to your life. And that sets up a rule in people's mind that I can't get back to my life in any shape or form unless the pain is gone substantially or unless the pain is gone 100%. Now, there's two important things about that, Brody. The first is that based on the latest research, we don't have very good methods for alleviating chronic pain fully. All the things that you and I do as a practitioner help, and they help to alleviate pain. But if we just use those methods alone, we don't have very good evidence that we can alleviate chronic pain 100%. The other part to that, the values part that is even more important, is that the latest research shows that if we put life before pain, so if we start getting back to living life, in essence, that's actually the best way to alleviate our pain. So we actually have to flip the script and start living life, and then the pain starts to go away. And that's a very different message than most people have received in traditional allopathic medicine.
It's so true. And it makes sense that if someone is fearful of injuring themselves or feels like, oh, I need to play it safe, so to speak, and that there's certainly getting kind of biological messages of like, hey, withdraw, isolate, because
Mhm.
that's certainly something that happens, that they may not necessarily notice that they've taken on this unconscious mantle of this dichotomy that like it's an if then statement. Like if I get rid of my pain, then I get to go back to the things that I value and enjoy, as
That's right.
opposed to being thinking about what can I do right now, or what could be a step in the direction of these things that I enjoy and that I love, that can actually then, giving ourselves something different to focus on,
Mhm.
pain takes up a little less real estate. I'm acutely aware of that, having dealt with many forms of chronic pain off and on for the better part of my life, that giving my consciousness something to do, something that allowed me to focus on something else, was hugely potent in terms of helping me through tough moments.
That's right. And if we kind of, we can kind of bring this full circle a little bit and bring it back to kind of neuroplasticity and how the brain works. Think about it this way, Brody. When you spend time with your closest friend, when you exercise and do a workout that you enjoy, how does all that make you feel?
Feels great.
Right. It feels good, right? So in essence, your brain has rewarded you for engaging in those activities. So there's a reward part of our brain. And when we touch base with that reward part of our brain, natural opioids are released. Really, really powerful opioids, more powerful, 100 times more powerful than anything you can buy in the drugstore, anything that can be prescribed for you. What happens with chronic pain is that you've been away from all those meaningful, valued activities for so long that when you first start to engage with them, you don't get that kind of opioid release the way you used to get it. So it takes a little bit of time first for that to kind of build back up, for those connections to rewire and for those opioids to be secreted again. But guaranteed, if you connect with those things regularly on a regular basis, a little bit each day, a little bit more, then your mind, your brain will reward you, just like our brain rewards us when we, connect with things that are meaningful to us. So, the take-home message is when you do things you love, you're rewarded by feeling good.
Absolutely, and that it just like your analogy of building a muscle, it's the same. It sounds like the same sort of thing that we
Yeah.
get better at it over time, the more
Now
that
the
we engage
the
with it.
yeah the you so just getting back because you asked me about commitment. What's the
Yeah,
commitment
yeah,
part
what
of
are we
that?
committing to?
So the commitment part are those little steps along the way. So the values, in essence, are the path. And that path goes on forever. You never reach a value. The values are like a guiding light, like your North Star that see you through on the journey. The commitment are the signposts along the way that keep you moving forward on that journey, that keep you committed to your values moving forward. So, kind of from a didactic, kind of very educational perspective, this makes a lot of sense to people, right?
Yes.
Okay, nothing's alleviated my pain. The things that I have actually tried to control or eliminate my pain, they haven't worked, and some of them have actually caused more problems for me, right? Like things like opioids can be
Yes.
problematic for people, and I'm not saying they don't have their place. There are many passive treatments, if you will, that have their place, but ultimately we're talking about how people can get back to living a real life where they don't have to depend on these things. So the committed action part is okay, let me spend some time and let me reflect on what's missing from my life, the things I pushed to the side. Let me reconnect with them. And that takes people some time. And those are some of the exercises I go through in my book called Radical Relief and things I work with patients and trained practitioners on. It takes time. This doesn't happen just kind of, snap overnight. People have to figure out, okay, God, really, what has changed? What have I left out? What have I forgotten about? What have I pushed away? And as they start to connect with that and they make that commitment to, okay, let me start to just have coffee with my best friend that I don't see anymore. And then let's do a full lunch. And then let's do lunch and a walk in the park. And then let's go back to that basic yoga class that we used to do together that I left behind. So those are the signposts along the way, that committed action, staying in line with that value of I value close personal friendships. And even though pain has taken that close personal friendship away from me, I value that so much that I'm going to start to recultivate that. And as I start to recultivate that friendship, eventually my pain will go away.
Sounds a lot like what I do with my clients with coaching, right? Is that beginning with the end in mind, how you want to feel, and then taking increasing like small steps over time to get there that feel doable and that feel like, yeah, that in that process, when someone succeeds in hitting a small goal, it reinforces the confidence that in fact change is possible.
I like that. And really, really what you're talking about is resiliency.
Absolutely.
Is we're helping people reconnect with resiliency. The other thing I like about ACT, and I'm sure this is similar to what you use in your coaching approach, Brody, is ACT doesn't look, and those who use ACT, we don't approach people as they're broken. No one who comes to me is broken. When you come to me, I believe that you are fully whole. You have everything within you to overcome this and heal for your pain. It's just my job to help facilitate that and to help, in essence, walk arm in arm with you on that journey. And that's very different from, let's say, traditional means, even traditional psychology that likes to place labels on people like, well, you're depressed
Yes.
or you're or
Let's
you're or
let's
you're
give you a
anxious.
label and let's fix that thing that's wrong with you.
Right. And in essence, pain, even chronic pain, is a part of the human experience. Many of us, just like you mentioned, you've had it, Brody. I've had chronic
Mhm.
pain as well. We've all had it, and there are ways to overcome it. But we don't overcome it by approaching people and looking at them either physically or psychologically like they're broken. We approach them as, hey, this is part of your current human experience. And I have some tools that can help you and some methods that are proven to help you overcome it. And that's potentially when people first contact that is so validating for them because for so long people have told people with chronic pain that physically they're broken, right? Things are broken in their body, things are bulging, things are out of place, things are out of alignment, et cetera, et cetera. Things aren't working, or they have a chemical imbalance and they need an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, or they need their pain system isn't working right, so they need an opioid. All of that has very, very, if any evidence to support that. But we have a whole lot of evidence that when we help cultivate a healthy relationship and don't look at people as being broken, but look at them as hopeful and that they have everything they need inside them, that's the great way to start off a relationship and to start people with this whole process.
Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more. That is so important to hold out there as a first premise is that people are whole and that the body heals itself and that those tools happen within. in Chinese medicine, the idea that pretty much like helping to restore homeostasis, helping to restore the body's wisdom is homeostatic balance, and that can get derailed. But I would be remiss if I didn't contribute to this conversation on chronic pain, that there are so many potential mechanisms by which acupuncture can help with people with chronic pain on both like turning the volume down in the brain on what's happening there, the helping with or like reducing central sensitization, releasing endogenous opioids, the moderating adenosine levels. There's lots of different pathways by which acupuncture can help the physiologically change what's going on with the brain and change the communication between the brain and the body, and to reestablish something like harmonious communication as opposed to overreacting to small things, which is sometimes happens on a physiological level, not on an emotional level, and also helping the brain to create better map of where it is in space, which allows for more freedom of movement. So for people who are interested in learning more, you can check out the episode that I did with Mark Whalen on how acupuncture works. Also, potentially the neurology and acupuncture one with Dr. Ayla Wolf, whose migraines class I just finished up, and it was fantastic.
That's
Practitioners
right.
out
And,
there.
and those are important topics that you're mentioning that people should, give credence to, because if you have a brain, let's say, that's not optimized, and we talk about a lot about the brain rewiring itself, which makes it sounds like it's like, hard wires. We can actually touch it like electrical circuits. And the brain isn't hardwired like that. And actually, in reality, the brain is actually very soft. And as you mentioned, full of lots of chemicals. So there's lots of different tools and techniques, acupuncture being one of them, nutrition being the other, where we can help optimize and set the brain up for success as we're using these cognitive and mindfulness strategies. It's very difficult to create change in a brain that is not primed for success. So things like nutrition, acupuncture can prime the nervous system for success.
Yeah, exactly. And it really helps that it sounds like too, when people are having a different relationship, a mindful relationship with their pain, and doing something like ACT, that they give themselves it's maybe an accelerated permission to evolve past it, because it really can be something that people take on as part of their identity. And
Mm-hmm.
that being able to forget that and to be able to shed it, I think there's so many layers to that, and certainly it's super empowering to have things that we can do on our own. Joe Tatta, this has been a really enlightening conversation, and your book is Radical Relief, your previous book being Heal Your Pain Now. Is that correct?
Yep, the current
Yeah,
book is called Radical Relief, A Guide to Overcome Chronic Pain.
great. And that you also have the Healing Pain podcast where people can learn more. And if people are interested in connecting with you, where would you suggest they go?
Go to the mothership, which is my website. It's the Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. Kind of a long name, Integrative Pain Science Institute.com. It's the best place to find out everything about me and all the information that I have.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate this time together.
Thanks, Brody. It's been fun chatting today.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit, and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.